Hey there, curious minds. Ever wondered if the mystical Sufis, like the legendary Rumi, were truly devout Muslims? Or is there more to the story? You see, these spiritual explorers were well versed in the Quran and Islamic teachings. But here is the twist. Could their profound understanding of Islam have led them to a secret departure from Islam? And if they did take a silent exit, why is it shrouded in mystery? If you're itching for some thought-provoking answers and want to unpack this mystery and figure out if Sufis were truly Muslims till the end of their lives, stick around because it's coming up. Flashback to the 7th century. When the Arabs rose to power, they spread their beliefs through the Middle East, often through harsh means like the jizya tax and amputation. The tax was imposed on non-Muslims, including Christians and Zoroastrians, and was more than the ordinary tax that Muslims used to pay, so this could persuade some non-Muslims to accept Islam. But the problem was once they accepted Islam, they had to stay Muslim no matter what, because those who expressed ideas defying Islamic beliefs could face execution as apostates. Amputation was also the harsh punishment of cutting organs operated on robbers and non-believers. As Islam became the heartbeat of the Middle East, the Quran was the gateway to literacy and knowledge. Those who wanted more education, especially future jurists, clerics, or philosophers, had to dive deeper into Islamic texts. Given this context, it's clear that when well-known Sufi poets reference Islamic texts or figures in their poems, it doesn't necessarily mean they were devout Muslims, meaning their use of Islamic imagery could be seen as a product of their cultural and educational background, rather than a declaration of faith. But here is where it gets interesting. Many thinkers of the time, branded as philosophers or Gnostics, dared to challenge Islamic principles. Fast forward 2 centuries post-Muhammad, and we see Gnostic thought weaving its way into mystical spirituality. Take Junaid of Baghdad, a Persian sage who played a pivotal role in molding Sufism into what some perceived as pantheistic belief system. He boldly claimed whatever attains to true being is absorbed into God and becomes God. Then there is the enigmatic Mansur al-Hallaj, another Persian whose execution for blasphemy only fueled his fame among Sufis and poets alike. His infamous declaration, "I am the truth," sent shockwaves through the Orthodox establishment. Many folks think Sufism is just the mystical branch of Islam, but that's not the whole story. Sure, Sufism might have extracted some of its basics from the Quran and Islamic tradition, but it's way more than that. It's like this universal mysticism that vibes with other spiritual traditions too. At its core, Sufism is all about loving God by intuitively sensing the united spirit of the whole universe. It's about unity of being and how everything is interconnected. Pretty deep stuff, right? Now, in the Quran, we've got a couple of famous verses that together might point to this unity of being. Check these out. There is no other deity but the one God, and we all belong to God and we are returning to it. Remember, we like to use the pronoun it to refer to God, as it doesn't have any gender. Nevertheless, there are the Quranic verses that regressive Muslim clerics use to deny this Sufi pantheistic deduction. For example, "and there is none comparable unto it." Unlike Abrahamic religions that give you the perception of God as being a completely supreme, unreachable, and separate spiritual entity, Sufism or most mystical schools teach you that God is everything and nothing in particular at the same time, meaning that God is the universe we live in and experience, plus its spiritual dimension that we may not easily experience unless through deep meditation, contemplation, and intuition. But at the same time, God is not an object or a distinctive entity or even a phenomenon. Even a God-believing philosopher like Spinoza mentioned that God is not separate from nature and the universe, as this assumption contradicts the infinity of God. Thus, in Sufism, God is not separate from everything it created. Rather, creation is a manifestation of God's power or a reflection of God's projection. This idea was also echoed by great Greek philosophers like Plotinus and Sufis like Ibn Arabi, who used the metaphor of the sun and its rays to explain the relationship between the creator and the creation. Now here's where it gets tricky. A lot of these awesome Sufis were living in times when Islamic governments harshly implemented barbaric Islamic laws to suppress any dissenting voice. The authorities and extremists were not fans of them, to put it mildly. They censored, persecuted, and even executed Sufis for teaching that people could have a direct line to God or even become one with it without going to clerics. Heavy stuff. So what did clever mystics like Sanai do? They got creative. They composed their thoughts in form of poem and came up with all these metaphors and code words to talk about their mystical ideas. You'll see words like the friend, the beloved, the wine cellar, the cupbearer, tavern, chalice. You get the idea. This ambiguity and sneaky wordplay served like a double-edged sword. First, it made it super hard for the authorities to censor their work or come after them for their out there mystical ideas. But it also shows how tough it is to put the ecstasy of connecting to infinite God into words. I mean, how do you describe something that's beyond all names and forms? It's like trying to explain color to someone who's never seen it. Smart, right? But here is a wide thought. Could all this coded language also be a way for these poets to secretly tell us they'd left Islam without getting in trouble? It's quite possible, folks. Think about it. They used wine and drunkenness as a metaphor for spiritual awakening. But why wine? Why not hash or opium, which might have been even more common back then and not also banned in Islam? Some experts think using wine as a symbol was on purpose, because it was forbidden in Islam. It's like they were subtly rebelling against the rules. Some Sufi poets like Hafiz took it even further. Check this out. From the tavern of love where the fine wine is brewed, give me a few drinks, let not Ramadan intrude. Pretty bold, right? He's not just using wine as a metaphor here, he's explicitly challenging one of the holiest Islamic occasions. It's like he's saying, my spiritual intoxication is more important than your religious fasting. That's some next level rebellion right there, because they could even get in trouble for drinking water during Ramadan. Now let's talk about another keyword in Sufi poetry: love. It's everywhere in their writings. Sufism teaches that we're born to learn how to love ourselves, each other, and the universe, to experience the infinite love of God. It's beautiful stuff. But here is something that might surprise you. The word love, in the sense of that romantic, passionate love, doesn't even appear once in the Quran. This absence of love in the Quran versus its abundance in Sufi poetry raises some interesting questions. Were these poets filling a gap they saw in traditional Islamic teachings? Or were they expressing something entirely different, perhaps even at odds with the real Islam? For early Islamic ascetics, fear of eternal punishment in hell was the primary incentive to faith and piety. Eventually, however, a fervent love for God displayed by such early Sufi or mystic saints, such as the woman Rabia Basri, became a central theme and provided a basis for emerging Sufi mysticism. But hey, did I say that Sufis quit Islam very implicitly? That might have come out a bit imperfect then, because some Sufi poets even explicitly, or at least somewhat explicitly, declared their distaste for Islam. But many of us born Muslims just didn't want to see or admit this. Take, for example, Attar Nishapuri. He was a renowned Persian poet and Sufi mystic from the 12th century. His works, like the Conference of the Birds, are celebrated for their profound spiritual insights. But Attar didn't shy away from controversy. Check out this verse he composed. O Muslims, I am that heathen who this creed I scorn, being called a Muslim, a non-Muslim belt I wore. We will sing you the rest of this beautiful, inspiring anti-Islamic poem in the end of this clip. The non-Muslim belt he is talking about is originally called the Zannar. This was a distinctive belt or a girdle that non-Muslims, particularly Christians and Zoroastrians, were required to wear in certain Islamic societies to distinguish them from Muslims. By saying he wore the Zannar, Attar was making a bold statement about his rejection of Islamic identity. Some even hinted at returning to their ancestors' faith. Hafiz says, till from wine and tavern there is a trace. Our head will trail the Magi's master's pace. The master's ring in my ear since time began. We are what we were, this path forever our plan. Now this verse is loaded with meaning. The Magi refers to Zoroastrian priests, and Hafiz is saying he'll follow their lead as long as there's wine and taverns. And more specifically, the ring of Zoroaster, as the master of all Magi, always rings in his ear. Remember, wine was a big no-no in Islam, but it was used in Zoroastrian rituals. So Hafiz is not just talking about getting drunk. He's hinting at following a pre-Islamic Persian religion. Now I can already hear some Muslims jumping in. Hold up, Hafiz in Arabic means the memorizer, and he was called Hafiz because he memorized the Quran. Yeah, thanks for the Arabic lesson, folks. But here's the kicker. Hafiz didn't just know the Quran, he knew it inside out. And guess what? That deep knowledge might be exactly why he saw issues with it. In fact, Hafiz doesn't just hint at problems with the Quran, he practically shouts it from the rooftops in this verse. Love only will rescue you if you likewise have the Quran in 14 forms memorized. Now let's unpack this bombshell. Hafiz is dropping two truth bombs here. First, he's saying that knowing the Quran inside out will give you a headache from realizing what kind of horrible nonsense is in it. What really saves you then? Love. Universal love. It's like he's simply saying, I know the Quran, but trust me, it's not the answer. But wait, there's more. Hafiz is also spilling some serious tea about the Quran itself. 14 forms? That's right, folks. Hafiz is pulling back the curtain on a little secret that many Muslims might not want you to know. The Quran isn't this one solid, divinely protected text. It's got multiple versions, 14 to be exact. This flies right in the face of the common Islamic claim that the Quran has been divinely preserved since it was first revealed. Hafiz, the guy who knows the Quran better than most, is telling us that's not the case. It's a mic drop moment that challenges the very foundation of how many Muslims view their holy book. And you know, his argument has already been proven true in our time to some extent. Have you heard about the discovery of the Sana'a's Quran in Yemen? This ancient manuscript shows significant textual variations from the standard Quranic text, adding weight to Hafiz's claim, made centuries ago. And we think we don't need to repeat ourselves in the case of Rumi, how he poetically expressed his exit from Islam. If you haven't had the chance, watch this clip of ours. Then some of you Muslims might say, no way, all these poets you mentioned have verses praising Islam and Islamic giants like Muhammad in the beginning of their poem books and blah blah blah. But then we're gonna be like, buddy, have you forgotten how many Sufis, thinkers, philosophers, writers, and poets got terrorized, persecuted, and executed throughout history for declaring their anti-Islamic ideas and thoughts? Do I have to name them? Okay, I will. Mansur Hallaj, Sohrawardi, Ibn al-Mukaffa, Ayn al-Qudat Hamidani, and Imad al-Din Nasimi. Why do we even have to go back centuries? Look at modern times. Salman Rushdie, Taslima Nasrin, Raif Badawi. So those praise poems at the beginning of their works? could be just a smokescreen to get past the censors and publish their works and real thoughts. Moreover, people change, right? Like many of us here, these Muslim-born poets who might have been once devout Muslims, after deeper study, just quit Islam very peacefully. Oops, did I say peacefully? Oh, sorry YouTube, I meant to say peacefully. Please don't demonetize this video or channel. Speaking of demonetization, here is a quick PSA. If you want to support our cause, consider buying us a coffee at our buymeacoffee.com page. Some of our videos, especially the ones where we critique religions, get slapped with the not advertiser friendly label faster than you can say heretic. Your support keeps us going and keeps the truth flowing. Now let's talk about Sufis and their Zandiq rituals. Zandiq is a term often used to describe heretics or those who deviate from Orthodox Islam. Sufis, known for their mystical practices, often engaged in rituals that raised eyebrows among more conservative Muslims. These rituals could include playing music, ecstatic dancing, consumption of wine, symbolically or literally, and practices that seem to blur the lines between the divine and the human. Conservative Muslim clerics consider even music and dance haram, forbidden, or at the best case, not proper. Getting a true number of practicing Sufis is hard to come by, since it depends on the order and how one defines a Sufi. But what that may interest us is that many do not consider themselves Muslim. One article by Stephen Schwartz, a practicing Sufi himself, says out of the roughly 1.3 billion Muslims worldwide, 5% are Sufis. But much of the confusion in defining Sufis as Muslims stems from the fact that Sufism evolved differently than mainstream Islam. Sufism overall has been indeed one of the many ways to escape or keep distance from Islam, but may be somewhat a shy and conservative one. So what do you think about the complex relationship between Sufism and mainstream Islam? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't tune away just yet. We are ending this video with a beautiful anti-Islam poem from Attar, the renowned Persian Sufi poet. But before that, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Till later, peace. O Muslims, I'm that heathen who this creed I scorn. Being called a Muslim, a non-Muslim belt I've worn. I luck the Sufi lodge, the tavern I embrace. Wine brings me pride and grace, the mosque leaves me disgraced. When goddess is in the pub, the Kaaba in vain. My fame as a pub crawler, for her I sustain.